Good morning and welcome to the weekly review here on Teachers Talk Radio. Today we're joined by Shaniqua, John and Lianne, and a little bit further on in the show we're going to be joined by Loic Menzies to talk about a new report from the IPPR. Now, it is the middle of the summer holidays, but the school news keeps on coming, and our first story of the week, we're going to be talking about persistent absence. Now, a Schools Week article from government data shows an alarming absence rates are not improving post-COVID. We've got reports here of 1 in 5 pupils persistently absent. This is all with a backdrop of the government setting up attendance hubs, attendance advisors. Gillian Keegan saying being in school is quite simply the most important thing for children's education. Well, things aren't working by the look of the data. Shaniqua, we're going to come to you first. Are you worried about attendance rates in schools at the moment?
I am, but I feel like this has been a long time coming. This has been going on for a little while now. I think there's actually like so many societal reasons for this. I think there's like poor support for children with mental health issues. I think there's been poor support for SEN children. You know, we've got CAMS with a long list. You know, we've got children with caring responsibilities. Long COVID has been quite a big thing, actually. You know, I also wonder how many of those children with persistent absences are like young carers. You know, what percentage is SEN where provisions can't be met due to education cuts? I'm a governor in a school, and actually I know that they've been really trying with attendance, really been trying to push attendance. But you have a lot of families who go back to the country that they're from for healthcare because they're on a waiting list for so long here. So there's so many different reasons why there is a gap or there's persistent absences. It is quite worrying, but I can see so many schools are trying their best. They're doing everything that they can with the resources they can at the moment. Yeah.
And I want to go to John next. You know, we've heard often in the past about this, you know, returning to normal, you know, getting back to pre-COVID times. You know, is this just a part of the new normal in education? Has something got to change, or is absence always going to be up now, do you think?
Well, I see what you're referring to there, the kind of idea that the new normal is a bit like working from home. You know, we discovered how nice it was to work from home so late. So kids have logically thought the same thing, and maybe something in that they're seeing more parents at home and so on. All of those things that Shaniqua just identified, I think you're right. The bigger picture of from mental health to societal pressures and so on are part of what's going on right now. But the normal, return to normal, we hear a lot of that actually lately. Let's return to normal. Exams are normal this year again and so on. The new normal, or rather, the normal wasn't good. As a society, we're not good at dealing with kids, with people generally, who don't fit in. There's that 30% of students or so who don't do well at school, and yet they are. That's just casualties. They are collateral damage to our education system, and there's that group of students who don't like school, and there's a significant number. I mean, there's the ones who loved school and the ones who, you know, they got through, and the ones who don't like school. Too many students loathe school, and don't blame the parents, don't blame the schools. There's something very fundamental wrong in the state of our society if that many kids don't like school.
And you can see there we've got some tweets coming in already, some messages. Charlotte Davies, every child that I see with attendance issues has problems with poor development in motor skills, sound processing and visual processing. We simply do not check or support child development. Now, Lianne, as I come to you, it's a really complicated thing. We talk about attendance as if it's simple, you know, just getting them through the door. But this can be a really complicated issue in improving attendance for schools.
Yeah, I think a lot of it I find comes down to actually like teacher CPD, and are we skilled enough? We're not psychologists. I know for myself and even my assistant, like the many hats that we put on throughout the day. We're not just teachers, we teach, we're therapists, we're occupational therapists throughout the day. We do fine and motor throughout the day. So I kind of feel like, following on from the tweet that we've just had, I do think teachers and school staff need more like almost like psychological CPD, you know, because times have changed, parenting has changed, whether it's for the better or for the worse with children, I don't know. But I think the many factors come down to maybe like a change in brain and mindset, and I just feel like we don't have the strong enough skill sets to deal with that within a classroom, or do we have even the staffing to deal with that within a school?
And that does wonderfully lead us on to our next segment, Lianne. So thank you for the segue, where we are going to be talking slightly about the what the differences in schools and the future of schooling. But before we do, I just want to give a shout out to Pearson EdXL, who help us here at Teachers Talk Radio. Pearson EdXL's new student-centered French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater for the needs of all learners, regardless of their backgrounds, ability or reason for studying. It's rooted in language, knowledge, and their assessments are transparent, accessible, allowing students to showcase their language skills through an inclusive and relatable content. New Pearson MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding and appreciation of the wider world. Now, if you want to find out more about that, you can check them out at go.pearson.com/MFL. And it is time, as I say, for our next story. And welcome back. And as I said, we are joined now by Loic Menzies to talk about a new IPPR report that he co-authored, Balancing Act, Navigating the Tensions in Our School Systems. And this is from the Institute for Public Policy Research, along with the Centre for Education Youth. Loic, welcome.
Hi there, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem at all. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this, but you've heard us possibly talking in the first half there about some of the issues we're facing with attendance. And in this report, it does talk about change. But, I think we should start off by asking that, is there and who has an appetite for change in our education system?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people do, don't they? And it's no surprise given some of the things you were discussing a moment ago. But I guess when I think about this, I also think back a bit further and I think about some of the positives too. I think of back when I started teaching in 2006 and how things have changed there. And I think part of what we tried to do with this report was think, okay, well, where are there some strengths? Where has the balance, where have we done some things that have worked well, but how can we get the balance right? Because I think a lot of people have this sense that some things maybe have been achieved in the last decade, 2 decades, in terms of building a much more evidence-informed profession, in terms of getting those expectations and standards higher. But in some ways, it feels like the balance might not be quite right. We have so many teachers leaving the profession. We have so many of these issues that we've been discussing around attendance, around mental health, and so on. It feels like perhaps the balance isn't right. So what we tried to do here was to try and do a really balanced look at these things to try and understand that, because we're hearing calls from some people to say we really need to reduce the pressure to try and make sure that young people are able to develop different skills or flourish in different ways. We've got other people saying actually, we've still got too few kids getting the basics right in terms of those literacy and numeracy skills that are going to open up doors in the future. So where does the balance lie, and what should we do? I think those were the calls we were trying to answer with this report.
Now, one of the questions that comes through, sort of reading through the report and the attached things, is an issue around control. And, there's talk about, obviously, external exams, but who should be in control? Is it school-based curriculums, meeting local needs, or, are we sticking with this idea of national schemes and external exams?
Yeah, so I think that it came up in several the reports organised around curriculum, mental health and well-being, and assessment, and each one looks at these different tensions. But as you say, control is a bit of an underlying theme in there, and it's a tough one because if we just take the curriculum example, there's so much to be said for having that flexibility in the classroom to be able to adapt what you're working on, to be following up exciting avenues and people's interests and so on. But you've got to balance that against the fact that actually teachers have limited time to design a curriculum. They have it actually takes, because we have to do so much prioritization when shaping a curriculum, to make those really tough decisions about what to include takes a huge amount of subject expertise and time. And then we want something that's coherent, that builds up from school to school and across different year groups and across different subjects, and that coheres with the assessment system and that coheres with the resources we've got available and so on. And those things actually mean that you do need to have a certain amount of central control. And I'm a bit concerned about the fact that we have a national curriculum, but it's not all schools have to teach it. Actually, I think we should have a national curriculum, because I want all kids to have an entitlement to the stuff that's going to open doors up to them in the future. So that is a tension. And so what we try to talk about in the report is how can we just adjust the dial on that, to make sure that there is some space for flexibility, but at the same time that we are quite clear about the fact that there should be a national curriculum. Those decisions should be made by subject experts who've got the time to think about what should be learned, what are the most important things to learn, and how should those things be sequenced. So yeah, another one of those balancing acts that comes out all the way through.
So not necessarily a swing towards the Welsh model, where schools are defining their own individual curriculums at a school-based level then?
Well, I think there's this quite useful thing that Tim Oates talks about in terms of content versus context. So he talks about the fact that a national curriculum might well specify what content you should learn about. So maybe that's, let's say in geography, you're learning about different waterways, which might include canals and rivers and lakes or whatever. But that in your local context, you might make decisions to apply that in your particular context. What is the geography around you, and how are you going to learn about those things in your local context, which is what you do as a teacher, isn't it? So that actually is an example of how you can have that flexibility balanced with some kind of core expectations that everyone should have this entitlement to learn about some of these really powerful ideas.
And so moving on to another aspect of that, about meeting the local needs then of the people, is a question around the purpose of education and whether it's changed and what it encompasses. When we've heard about already, when we're talking about attendance, about mental health and some of the support things that need to be used. Has the purpose and the outcomes of education changed? Do we need to adjust to meet those needs?
I think it's always changing, and you can look back. I'm writing a book about education policy at the moment, which means I get to look back at loads of the history of education policy. And these debates have been around forever, because they're things that lie in tension. They're things that there are different purposes. That's just we are trying to achieve lots of different things through education, and those sometimes they align, sometimes they're in tension. And people will kind of weight one higher than other, and we disagree about that, and that's why we have politics to make those kind of decisions and reach some sort of position on that. So I think it's right that there's always a healthy debate about the purpose of education, and I don't think when you look at the arguments that are being made and that people make now as if they're new arguments about the purpose of education, but they're exactly the same arguments that have been made for decades, centuries, a long time. So yes, there's always new events that happen that push the dial one way or the other, and so on. But I think it's wrong to think that there's some kind of dramatic shift that has just happened now that changes that. What really matters is some of those events that you've talked about around the pandemic and so on in your earlier segment, around attendance, which are and the economy, that mean that actually the system is facing different stresses. We have that kind of massively pared back network of support when it comes to CAMS, when it comes to local authority services and so on. Those are actually the things that are affecting the day-to-day life of teachers and pupils, which we need to be adjusting the system for. But that's not about the purpose of education. That's about the fact that we've underinvested in things that matter, and that we need to shift that balance again.
Maybe if I change the question slightly there to maybe what a school is expected to do. Do we need to change that then to include more mental health support? As what a school can be expected of them. We hear that schools, we're picking up more of the social work, possibly aspects where things are being strained, possibly more work around attendance, more work around mental health. Do we need to, as Lianne suggested, see more support for teachers and school-based staff and funding then to meet these changing needs?
Yeah, so the third section of the report, part 3, is all about mental health and well-being, and there we talk about what is the role of schools here, and what can they do, and what needs to happen. And my view here is that we should distinguish between the teacher and the school. So for me, a school is an incredible asset to a community. It's universal. We have them in every community. Almost everyone goes to them. So we should be making the most of that. They should be hubs for support for an entire community, for young people. They should provide a doorway into the specialist services that young people need. I don't think that necessarily means it's teachers who have to be doing that. Well, I don't think it should be, because I think teachers have got enough on their plate. So yes, teachers inevitably have to respond to what happens in their classroom, and therefore they need the support to do that. But we shouldn't be trying to train them up to be specialists. We should be in mental health or in social work and so on. It's hard enough to train people up to be amazing teachers delivering incredible lessons, let alone doing all of those things on the side. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be revisiting the vision there was behind in extended schools, behind some of the US models of those things. These should be assets. I think that actually when you look at what's going on with mental health and well-being amongst young people, we see evidence that childhood just isn't good enough. We're not giving young people a good enough deal when it comes to childhood. And that's not just about changing what happens in lessons. Actually, most kids really enjoy lessons. And what we should be doing is making sure we're giving them access to a really enriching childhood, but we're making sure they're growing up in really strong communities with really resilient, happy families who've got the access to the basics that they need. And those are all things that schools can help to do by acting as those hubs, but let's not expect teachers to do everything.
I want to throw to John quickly as our most experienced panelist, shall I term it, and we've talked a little bit possibly about how sometimes education can swing back and forth. Does this sound like to you like the normal ebbs and flows and swinging back and forth, or a movement towards something new in education?
I think it's both of those things. I think that you can't have a career in teaching as I had and not see the ebbs and flows, not see progressive, traditional arguments move backwards and forwards, and the dial swing backwards and forwards and so on. Something, though, has happened lately. And I think and when I say lately, I mean the last couple of decades, there has been a move towards things in education that I think we need to worry about. And I think we do need to worry about this pursuit of rigor, the pursuit of schools as places of pressure for staff and pressure for students. I think that is relatively new. And some of the emphasis, and I absolutely agree with Loic's view there, that childhood is something we did sometimes lose sight of in the pursuit of rigor and learning. I remember during a snow day a few years ago, there's lovely snow days. Snow days are great. Teachers love snow days. And there was a snow day. Lots of schools were closed in the country. And I saw a head teacher interviewed on the telly. And he said, he said, as soon as possible, I think we should have closed the schools too early. We need them in there learning. I thought, no, we don't. We need them outside building snowmen. That is part of childhood as much as anything else. And it's a holistic picture of childhood. It's very important. I think this report says lots of useful things about that. But I think it's a necessary antidote to something unpleasant that's been happening the last couple of decades.
Thank you. Now, we are going to move on slightly, but Loic, thank you so much for joining us. I wondered, I want to leave it with the last word for you, really. If there are teachers who maybe have heard this or are listening to this and want to do some more thought or some reading before it, how can they reach out? How can they find more information?
Yeah, so the report's been published by the Institute for Public Policy Research with the Centre for Education and Youth, and it's hopefully quite readable. And I think one of the things we tried to do with it is to be really honest about the fact that these are difficult questions, and that actually, even if you think you really know what you think about this, I've been working in education research for over a decade. I've been teacher and youth worker before that, and I thought I knew what I thought about many of these things, and yet doing the research and really digging into it made me really challenge and rethink some of my views, because these are tough questions. So I really recommend that people do take a read of the report with a really open mind and say to yourself, actually try and find something that you change your mind about when you read this, because actually there's a reason people have been debating this stuff for so long. It's because there are really strong arguments on both sides. So have a read and rethink some of your opinions, because it will make you a more engaged, more thoughtful practitioner, and it's interesting stuff. So yeah,
it certainly was. Yeah, I enjoyed reading it myself, and yeah, it is easy to read. I definitely, I would recommend people go out and find it and have a read through, because as you say, difficult but really interesting things to think about.
So, a message on Twitter. Let me know what you think. I'd love to. Yeah, I'm happy to carry on the conversation on Twitter. So yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you. And on to our next story. And welcome back. Well, a story here that hopefully we have a break from, possibly not during these summer holidays, but in the TES, they are reporting well-being hit by staff room cliques, say 3 in 5 teachers. This is from a teacher tap survey, which also found that 2/3 of teachers said they've worked in a toxic school at some point. But one of the interesting findings from it that's been pulled out is this idea that staff rooms or schools have cliques in them that are affecting teacher well-being. Now, I'm going to come to Lianne first on this one. Lianne, is this something you recognise as someone who works in education, cliques as they're being called in this?
I don't know that I've seen cliques, but I definitely think you probably get groups of teachers or anyone in the staff room that maybe sit together or lunch together. And I think schools, especially primary, are very community based, right? So I think a lot of the time you get a lot of teachers from within the community that work in the same school. So possibly sometimes it comes from that aspect. I think about it sometimes. I think some of the things that you get coming out of staff rooms almost sound a bit like things you get coming out of the playground. And I do think sometimes as teachers and adults, we should maybe take a step back and look at the situations and wonder why we're dealing with things in the staff room that we manage with children in the playground.
Now I'm going to come to Shaniqua next. Shaniqua, you strike me, you were in the cool gang, of course, in your staff room, hanging around the coffee maker, having in jokes. Is this something that you think happens? Is there a possibility that people are ostracized in their own staff rooms?
Yeah. Do you know what? I can see both sides, because I remember in my first year of teaching, I was like, well, I've got loads to focus on. I'm not going to go in the staff room. They're just, talking to each other, gossiping. I'm not going to be involved. But then I realized that actually being part of the staff room and being part of that clique is it's actually like being a part of the community in a way where actually, I'd found that actually the more I hung out with everyone, the more, I knew what was going on. There'll be things I forget and we'd have a discussion about it. They'd save seats, we'd find out things. But I also realized it was a place where you could complain. And I think that's the other thing, where people complain. There's a lot of gossiping, which, as Lianne said, we deal with that with the children. But I also feel like, and I know it says that, more teachers are talking about, these toxic environments. And I think it says it's due to school leadership. Well, actually having that opportunity where you talk to each other and realize I'm not on my own. At the moment, I know so many people have signed off with mental health. Over the last year, I was signed off with mental health. So, just having people in the school who know what you're going through, that's great. But then it can become quite gossipy. And I think that's the other aspect of it, where I don't know, you should have that community hub. But actually, if people don't feel like they're able to sit in the staff room and be part of the group, then what are we doing? That's the other thing.
Now I'm going to come to John next, because this strikes me, or this stereotype, maybe this pastiche of a staff room and how it works is something that I recognise as always being there in TV shows, in jokes, in media. This idea that the fact that it is affecting people's well-being, though, is a new thing for me. Is this how staff rooms have always been? Should we be worried about how this is affecting our staff?
Yeah, I think we should be. And I think there is something new. Again, I'm going to sound like I always say this, something new and something old about this. There is the fact that schools are organizations of people, and they will form into groups, and there will be within that certain cultural differences between those teachers that think they teach more academic subjects and those teachers they teach more active subjects, and so on. Who knows? Those things are almost certainly going to happen. But something, again, I'm going to harp back to the point I made earlier, something in schools that harms teachers. And if teachers don't enjoy school, you can't expect students to. It has to be a place that's happy. It has to be a place that's enjoyable. And what's happening in schools is increasingly, I think, toxic cultures, microaggressions, passive aggression that can be done through things like sending out emails that say things like polite reminder. I mean, it's a trivial thing. Polite reminder means, there was an impolite version of this that you decided not to send. Or things like sending an email out to remind you something you haven't done that then is copied to people in senior positions. Little things. Well, they become part of the culture of accountability and new managerialism, which is harmful to the health of teachers and harmful to the general feeling that we are colleagues and we should be having fun. It's great teaching. It's really great, but it often isn't, and that's a real shame.
And that is something that I recognise myself. I've heard the phrase, and I'll put this out there. When you talk about collegiate support, people suggesting things like you should send an email so that you've got evidence you did something in case anyone asks, and that to me strikes as well. I'd rather make sure the thing was done. There is a lack of support around that, and as workload increases, and as Shaniqua sort of mentioned there. Are we, even past our first years, shrinking into our classrooms, particularly in primary school? Are we losing some of that? We lost it in COVID when we shut our staff rooms, and we stopped going to the staff room. Are we shrinking and isolating ourselves into our classrooms and losing some of that collegiate support? I want to go to Lianne on that one.
I think I want to follow on from Shaniqua, because I think the staff room is so important in teaching, that you can go and release almost at lunchtime. But I know from when I taught in the older year groups in primary school, I would spend half my lunchtime marking, because if you don't, you end up staying after school. So it's like work-life balance, but it's also like life balance. Do I want to take a lunch break for an hour, or do I want to mark for half an hour and have a lunch break for half an hour, but then I have to set up for the afternoon? It's like a toss-up in your own head of what life balance do you actually want. So I think that comes into it, I think, as well, with work-life balance.
Yeah, I guess there is a question there of, do you need friends at work, or where is that balance of, do you need to be best friends and chums and going out at the weekend, or does it just need to be support and well-being and not ostracized? Shaniqua, is there a way forward from this? If you were looking at this and reflecting on, either your own practice or practice from other schools, and saying, okay, well, clearly this is causing issues for some people, and we're not just saying it upset. We're talking about mental health here and well-being, and things that we should be taking really seriously. Is there something you think that schools or staff rooms or teachers could be doing to help address this?
Where do I begin? Clearly some people don't feel like they're welcome in their staff room, and some people don't feel like they've got the support. So I feel like overall these teachers and members of staff need to be feeling supported. Everyone should have a space where they feel like, they can release, but it shouldn't be a space where it's, adding extra pressures. There's enough pressures already in teaching. We don't need any more. So I'm really trying to have a think, because actually I can, with Lianne and John, everything they've been saying, and I've been thinking, sometimes you don't even get the chance to go into the staff room nowadays because you've got so much work to do. So actually, if you do go into the staff room, you shouldn't have to deal with this at the moment. So actually, I just feel like they should just feel supported in these schools. I don't know what the senior leadership team need to do, but they need to make sure their staff are feeling supported somehow.
I'm going to come back round to John. Oh, sorry, Lianne, go on.
I think teaching is a very hard profession, and people, I know we joke about it, but I think people outside of the profession don't understand it, and you need people that do the job to go through it with.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good start. Just recognise that we're all in this together, and it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And comments like, well, they were all right for me, or hiding what's difficult for you, and not sharing the stresses you're going through, and not recognising other people's stress as perfectly natural and as a side effect of a difficult, challenging job. And for managers, get out and about. Let's move around the school. Don't lock yourselves in your offices. Don't announce at meetings things that the audience listen to in meetings and mutter to themselves, that's a load of rubbish. Find out what people actually think. And I've sat in meetings like that where happy stuff's coming from the front of the meeting for the managers, and people around you are grumbling and muttering things to themselves. There can be a disconnect in schools. So, reach out. You say, connect with your fellow human in schools, whether it's in the staff room or and I don't mind. I think be friends. Go down the pub, or not if you'd rather keep your life separate. Whatever works for you. But it's perfectly okay to be friends and friendly, and it should be a happy atmosphere.
Fantastic. Well, that does bring us to the end of this week's weekly review. And there's been some big topics, even in the middle of the summer holidays. And I'm sure next week's will be an even bigger show with more and more information coming out. I'd like to say a big thank you to Lianne, to Shaniqua, to John, and of course to Loic, who joined us in the middle of the show. If you want to catch up, you'll be able to find this here on YouTube or in its Twitter form, or X as we are now calling it. And we will see you all next week on the weekly review. Thank you.